What do freestyle skiing, robotics, and high growth startups have in common? Today's guest, Roman Hölzl, has built a life around precision under pressure and is applying that mindset to revolutionize European manufacturing. Roman is the co founder and CEO of RobCo, a Munich based company building modular robotics arms to automate repetitive industrial tasks. Founded in 2020, they're backed by top investors like Sequoia and had their latest round, Series B, in February 2024. His personal story is a wild one, from crashing down mountains as a national freestyle ski champion to being named a Forbes 30 under 30 to closing deals with legacy manufacturers who've never touched automation before. In our episode today, we go deep on scaling hardware in a fragmented market. We discuss how to stay capital efficient as a robotics startup, how you build a truly multidisciplinary team, and how Roman uses deliberate risks, and also how a former life or death injury really helps him to keep perspective while scaling fast. Welcome to the show, Roman. We're so glad to have you here. So, we've just heard about your journey from freestyle skier to robotics CEO, but what stood really out to us was how that shaped your thinking. So, before we get into selling robots and building a RobCo, let's rewind a bit. You've had a pretty wild trajectory. Can you take us back to how a ski racer obsessed with flips and precision ended up deciding modular robots for factories?
Yes, happy to, Melanie. Great to be on board. So I grew up in a small Bavarian town in southern Germany, and the mountains were actually quite far away. So it was always like a 3-hour drive. And both my parents have been ski instructors. So we were skiing from like the age of 2, early 3s, and always fascinated by people doing, big jumps, backflips, all the good recordings and all that. So we kind of just bought our own, twin tip skis, freestyle skis. We were like 14, 15 years old. We is my brother and me. Then it all kicked off from there. Did a bunch of competitions across Europe, Japan, and Canada. Was skiing for the freestyle teams at Dünester and Lange, two French brands. And that all happened, I think, until maybe 2014, roughly. And then I had a big accident and fractured my spine. And so I was basically, going 100 miles an hour and then suddenly at zero. So I was doing my undergrad back in the day in Munich. So kind of just transitioned all the energy, all the time, right? 80, 90, 100 days on the mountain into academia and went from, a pretty bad university student, honestly, to a pretty good one. And then I guess even better in the master's degree, I really tried to push it there and live the same competitive spirit. And then I made it for my final year to Harvard as well in the States. And that basically led to us founding the company. So it's been skiing, big accident, academia, finished uni, started a PhD, dropped out of the PhD to found RobCo. And so 4.5 years later, we're here and talking about robotics, industrials, and everything that's involved in that process.
Fast forward to today, right? We heard in the intro, you guys do modular robotic arms, and you're helping basically traditional manufacturers to automate specific, often repetitive tasks. And I think many of your customers are also traditional SMEs. And I could imagine that sometimes hard to kind of drive that change or to drive automation. So what is your take on that? How do you currently perceive your customers, and what's your strategy to winning their trust?
Yeah. So that's a big one, Christian, right? Because manufacturing traditionally is just a very conservative industry. Everything has to be high precision, high quality, high tech times. And so for good reason, those customers are quite conservative when it comes to new solutions and especially innovative solutions. And so our strategy basically is to sell through 3 pillars, right? We sell through a very clear commercial ROI. So our solution just have to have a really great payback for our customers. And we'll get to that in a second. The second is technical feasibility. So outside in, those tasks might seem super simple. It's always a robot arm, moving parts around, palletizing, loading, unloading machines, and so on. But there's always a devil in the detail. And so you have to account for that. And then the third one is, again, back to that conservative market, is trust. And so we've now developed a playbook to build on all 3 of these foundations. In terms of commercials, we work with, I think by now, a nicely set up ROI calculation, and basically collaborating with our end customers on determining the right payback. And then tech, we've gone from 0 to 100, I guess. So we have a full stack simulation suite by now. We use Gen AI to pre-program and pre-generate full digital solutions of our customers' solutions. And then based off of that, we sell typically directly to end customers and oftentimes leverage references, the partner network to build trust at the same time. And so that's the winning formula that I'm happy to share here publicly, Christian, when it comes to selling into a group.
And I'm wondering, from the customer's perspective, how easy or fast or maybe complex is your ramp up, right, to really get going with you guys?
Yeah, so maybe taking a step back, that's been one of the biggest friction points in the industry. So why is that? You would typically hire someone, a local called systems integrator, who's setting the whole solution up. So there's someone coming in, purchasing a robot arm from one company, maybe in Japan, purchasing an end effector gripper from another company in Sweden, purchasing a safety device, programming the whole thing, connecting everything, doing the wiring, the mechanical design, and so on. And so the typical robot OEM, the big brands, they wouldn't sell into end customers. It's always, kind of been the local system integrators who set up a dedicated automation project for your specific case as a customer. And so that, of course, has worked well, but it also creates cost, it creates longer timelines, and it creates complexity because that's an expert job. Okay. And so what we do is essentially we bridge the gap between the local, close to the customer system integrator and robot OEM at the same time. And so we offer software, hardware, and integration. And we believe by doing all of that out of one holistic offering, we can be much faster at a much more attractive price point and with the most autonomous solutions out there that really drive solutions that hit our customers' requirements.
Right. And when I'm thinking about your, let's say, ramping up your the revenue on your accounts, are you more in the space of you go in with a pilot and then you try to land and expand, or are you in a position to get your customers committed to a 3-year, 5-year contract and they're in? How would that work?
Pilots. Okay. So we very seldomly do pilots. We sometimes do it for like bigger customers and if it really is required for the process, but we typically, in more than 90% of cases, we don't do it because we say if the technical feasibility simulation, the ROI calculation, and the trust is there, why wouldn't you go for the full thing, right? But then, to your point, that's exactly what it is. So we have a very classical land and expand motion. So we typically land initially with very clear solutions for those use cases, and then only by doing that we identify further use cases, further sites, further lines, sites in different countries, for example. So there's different vectors to expand off of an initial land of a robot. And so if you look at our biggest customers, we might have landed a robot, in a site like an hour away from Munich, or 2 robots, and now we've expanded to several other applications within that site. First starting with a milling machine, then pelletizing, then lathing machine. And then we expanded to, a new site still within Germany. And then there's that blueprint works. Why you guys not doing it in the States as well? And so there's a really nice land and expand motion to our business. That being said, we're still very much new business acquisition focused for now. But that's the setup.
So super interesting. And I think last question I have on that point is, would you say the land and expand then comes natural? Like once you're with the customers and they see the value, they're kind of jumping on you and they want to push your solution to all the different entities all over the world? Or does that still require then, let's say, a sales motion where you need to showcase to different entities or different factories or manufacturing places the ROI you can actually
so even the expansion motion is, an expansion B2B sales motion, because we always have to kind of go in and really identify the ROI, the technical feasibility for that specific case, right? But it's just much faster, much, more seamlessly to be done than the initial land. So can't really share numbers publicly, but it's literally 3 times faster than the initial land, and therefore also much less cost expensive, much less expensive for us in terms of customer acquisition.
Now, unlike software as a service, robotics comes with hardware installations and real world logistics, yet you have kept RobCo capital efficient and fast moving. How have you approached capital efficiency, especially in those early stages when every euro dollar really mattered? And were there maybe also any key levers like grants or shared resources, reused models, and so on that helped stretch the early budget?
So We're pretty proud about that, actually, Melanie. We've
Tell us
built the
more.
company on the foundation of being capital efficient and very commercially driven. We've always seen, deep tech companies specifically, founded out of university, like in our case, and then it takes 5 years until there's an initial, prototype and then some funding, and then suddenly a decade happened and nothing really worked out commercially, or at least not at scale. And so what we did is a couple of things. So first of all, we sold the very first really shitty prototypes. Okay, excuse my French. So we just basically said, if we test those solutions out, we're going to have some cost, have to drive out and set everything up and implement for example, demo robot at a laser machine for bicycle parts. So we might as well charge for that. Otherwise, it isn't really worth anything. And so that kind of set the tone from the beginning. So that's number one. Number two, we did all hands meetings, even when we were only like 4 or 5 people. Okay. So the all hands was, essentially 10 hands for 5 people, but we still always tracked commercial metrics. And so for the first year or so, we were working on certification, product development, all the foundation to basically drive product. We always had a zero, big zero in terms of top line, a big zero in terms of profit, big zero in terms of customers. And so, even your most back-end engineering focused person on the team is going to be like, we probably want to get that zero up. Okay. So that's another cultural push. And then thirdly, as you say, I think smart ways of financing play a big role. So we did acquire a tech transfer program in the very early days, taking RobCo out of university. That was a good one, non-dilutive. But then I think most importantly, or more importantly, is to be smart in terms of cash outflows and cash inflows. And so without going into too much detail, if you're a bit more sophisticated about that, you basically prepone, perhaps with the factoring provider as well, your customers' payments, and therefore be cash positive from the get-go, perhaps even before you pay for your own materials. And so there's delicate balance to be had there between building up stock and building up inventory and being fast in terms of delivery, but at the same time, not burdening your balance sheet too much with working capital and inventory and materials.
Was this also the story that you pitched to investors like Sequoia that you have on board, or how did you get the investors excited about the story?
Yeah, I mean that was probably a bit different between the stages. So in the early days, seed stage, not a lot commercially to prove out for. So that was more of a tech first type of push. And we had to do an actual fundraise, a small fundraise with a couple of selected firms that we knew from the Pest network or the local Munich-based network, and then raise a seed round. In the Series A, we did a full investor process, and then the Series B, we were able to execute pretty quickly with a fund that tracked us since the seed stage. It was kind of like you could either call it a very fast fundraise or a 3-year fundraise, depending on how you look at it. That led to that Series B.
How do you bring all that? So what I can imagine is, right, you have hardware, software, AI. So in terms of skills you need to have in the team, you have mechanical engineers, you have software engineers, you have people specializing on AI. You need to kind of mirror that in your sales motion, right? How do you bring all that in terms of skills into one roof, and also in terms of culture, that they're really pushing into the same direction?
So it's really difficult, is the short answer. And besides the functions you mentioned, we also have supply chain management, procurement, testing, assembly, right? And then implementation, servicing, and so on. So I think compared to a B2B SaaS company, there's perhaps anywhere from 5 to 7 teams more at any stage of the company. We do felt like the bigger we get, the more we can actually staff those teams and set it up properly. But then as soon as you do that, you have to kind of manage the interfaces and get that done properly. So I don't think we have cracked that yet, honestly. I think it's really important to be concise in terms of your vision and your culture, irrespective of whether someone's coming in with a PhD and a principal AI engineer, or a CRO leading your revenue team globally, or someone assembling modules, right? And so that's an important aspect. And I think all hands, for example, help. Team events help. One of our favorite guys on the shop floor just had his beer brewing event 2 days ago because he's brewing beer personally. I think these things help, but then it's just it's just a lot of heterogeneity in the setup, and I think people have to embrace that if they join RobCo as well.
Looking back, like, what were your biggest challenges you faced when kind of building this team and also operating under high growth, and then bringing all those different skill sets under one roof, pushing into the same direction?
Yeah. I mean, certainly hiring is a big challenge at all times, still is, right? At the current stage we're in, it's pretty seamless for us to predict top line growth and commercial growth depending on the input metrics we put on there. So depending on the amounts of leads we generate, amounts of calls we do in terms of BDR, SDR, amounts of qualified business meetings we have, and so on and so forth. So it's more of a machine now that we have to fuel in terms of people and hiring and the right team spirit. So that's a big challenge. And then the second, I think, is retainment as well, because first of all, your company changes every quarter or 2 quarters. And now with the US acquisition that we've made, for example, it's different time zones, different setup, a bit more remote between teams and not only based in Munich. So yeah, I think one thing that really helped was we always were based in Munich, the whole team, with like very few exceptions for the first like 3.5 years. And so I think that really built a strong cultural foundation that we can now leverage, into different geos, different continents, different teams in a more dispersed team setup in terms of geo as well.
Was Munich, or then also continental Europe in particular, a good place to find the talents you required?
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, I think Munich specifically, technical unis, loads of industrial companies, but then also, banks and VCs and consultancies across the stack. There's a lot of talent available. And when it comes to robotics talent specifically, I think there's 3 or 4 graduate degrees, just level degrees, purely on robotics in Munich. So that's a big pool. One coming in through computer science lens, the other one through, electrical engineering and so on. And then the second is the proximity to both Zurich and Stuttgart is, I think, pretty beneficial because those are big hubs of talent as well. So I think, yeah, for sure, Munich's a strong foundation. We love it. We're in the center of Munich as well. So
now I'd like to shift a little bit into mindset. You come from the world of elite freestyle skiing, where kind of risk and repetition and precision are everything. What parallels do you see between your skiing background and how you approach RobCo, especially when it comes to managing risk and staying sharp under pressure?
If you're asking me about my mindset, Melanie, but I'll actually answer with the support network outside of it, right? I think both in skiing back in the day, but also today especially, we're just really fortunate to have strong advisors, angel investors, a really strong chairman of the board to support us there, and also our investors. So it's always a team play. But then I think in terms of the parallels, there's a couple, okay? So I'll give you one example. The ski season always started early for us. It's September, October on the glacier. And so it'd sometimes be freezingly cold, in the minuses, and you'd still have to go for big jumps, right? Because those first couple of weeks really count to then win competitions in January, February, March. And so it was always a bit of a balancing between perhaps a foggy glacier day, -8 degrees, but still wanting to push your big jumps to then win competitions in January. But if you fuck it up, quite frankly, you're not going to compete at all in January. So, this is one of the, I think, parallels to our company setup as well, which is always kind of balanced and deliberate risk taking, but only to a certain threshold. So in order to grow fast, you have to set up the team and acquire materials and build everything out, which of course is a cash out initiative. So you can't do it like crazy, but if you don't do it, you're not going to win those customers. You're not going to drive that product development. I think there's some parallels there. And then the other thing is just the intensity, right? So I mean, back in the day, it's always been off the mountain to the hotel, over to France, new week coming up, some shoot there, coordinating this, over to Munich again. I don't know, some exam in between, and then off to Japan, kind of. So just fast pace, high intensity, always on the go. And I think that's pretty similar as well. I was late to this meeting, right, by 8 minutes or so. So that tells you that this hasn't really changed so much.
That is how entrepreneurship actually runs. So no hard feelings there. Now, you mentioned it yourself. There was like a very defining moment in your story back when you had the injury, and that changed quite a lot for you. Can you take us back back to that experience and share how it changed the way you think about challenge and resilience, particularly, or even what matters most in work and life?
Yeah. So, I mean, 2 things. First of all, it was just a really dark moment, quite dark time, right? And so even the lows today or in our current journey, I always kind of benchmark against that. And so that kind of just puts all challenges into perspective and makes it a bit easier. And I think it really drives resilience to go through the highs and lows of the current journey. And so that was actually a positive in hindsight. And then I think it was like 18, 19 years old, right? Everything was just great. Okay? Competition, skiing, outdoors, everything was, smooth. No injuries ever, no accidents, no sicknesses, no nothing. And so this was just a stark reminder about, the goings of life, I guess, essentially, and that, no one's invincible. So that was a good reminder to the young Robert back in the day.
Yeah, and I think it can also help other founders out there, because sometimes you feel like this is everything that defines you. You attach yourself just to this kind of story, and then life happens, and it suddenly is very different. And I think like just benchmarking it, as you said in another interview, against this dark night can really help in a certain sense. Do you have any kind of personal practices for staying grounded besides like basically thinking about what life gave you back then, and like just things that really help you when pressure builds, like physical routines, quiet moments, reflection habits, anything that helps you?
I think, not as much in terms of routines. So I try to stay active. I think that's a good baseline. And then, I'm rather maintaining like a close set of friends and family to really rely on, instead of like, 50 people out there. I think that's also back in the day when you just really see, who's there and who isn't. Otherwise, I'm not doing it really well, honestly. Like I'm not getting in the amounts of sports and meditation and sleep I would like to. So, it's always phases, right? I mean, there's phases, but it works really well. The summer for me is much easier. We live in Munich. We have a bunch of really active friends. Go for cycling tour in the morning and so on. It's harder to do in the fall and winter, I guess, and then especially hard to do with travel. So I'm just not at the stage yet where I kind of prioritize sports over travel, right, and rebook flights or whatever to make it happen. I'm just always on the first flight, 6 a.m. and so on. Skip another workout. So yeah. But I just can't really complain. It's Friday now. It's been a really hectic week, busy week, full week, long week, and I feel quite energized. So all good.
Which is also probably a way how you actually manage this whole under pressure being, because you get energy out of it. So that is
sure.
also part of it. Now, when you would go back to like the injury and to Roman recovering in the hospital, is there any advice that you would give him about the road ahead? Anything that would help you just to even be more excited about the future?
Just to be more present. I guess that's the main thing. Right? We just very much in the human nature to be predictive and looking into the future, and that creates a lot of anxiety, because in that moment you're not acting. And what I feel is, even if it's something super stressful is happening, as soon as you're acting on it, that stress fades away really quickly. And so I think to be just much more present and not as much anxious or future looking, so to speak, is would be my recommendation.
And now I'm thinking, Roman, I mean, obviously not everyone has been a highly competitive skier or sports person in the past, right? If you think about your team, also if you look back to the last couple of years, how do you build a high-performing, fast-paced team that kind of incorporates the spirit which you have in the company?
So, Christian, it helps for people to be competitive skiers.
I
I
can
think
imagine.
competitive at all. We just had this, new revenue person coming in, and he did a quick team intro yesterday. And so we're sitting together yesterday night. And one guy we didn't know, he actually was like, I think, third place in European breakdancing or whatever. So what I really feel like is there's typically with our high performers, there's very oftentimes some sports in the past that they've managed to do really well, or something that really stood out in terms of academic achievements, or in terms of perhaps, musical achievements or whatever. So I think it's bringing in a tremendous amount of passion and tremendous amount of energy and drive into what you're doing really helps for the setup that we have. I'd almost go as far as if you'd be in a senior role at RobCo or in a highly demanding role, likely going to be tough if you're not wired that way. I think that's just the way it is, right? At some point in time, RobCo is going to be much bigger, able to incorporate a bit more of a balanced setup in that regard. But I think for now, I mean, this is not just a full-time job, right? It is much more. And so if you have that parallel to competitive skiing or competitive breakdance, like Moritz yesterday night, which we didn't know about, which just really helps, push through there. Honestly, we're not really hiding it at all in the hiring process. For example, we basically tell people, look, this is not for everyone, right? And I think in terms of culture and values, what we've learned is what defines that is what you say no to. And we just say no to average work performance. This is a Champions League initiative for us. And so really helps to be wired that way.
I was because that was my next thought, right? Do you have particular proxies in the hiring process or structures where you really kind of try to filter for these types of characteristics, this obsession which you are describing?
There's specific ones when it comes to the different roles, right? So there's specific ones in tech and product and specific ones in sales, for example. But then I think just like overall kind of like passion, obsession, and energy really shows irrespective of the role and pretty quickly. So we just try to, I'm always doing final interviews with everyone we're hiring, and I'm always trying to index on that. But I don't have a clear question. In tech, we typically go in and unpack the most exciting project a person has had in the past, and go deep on that front and identify, what drove success or unsuccess, missuccess. And then in commercial roles, it's more on, bigger deals, what got people into sales, why the transitions happen, what about quotas, what about big tickets, how'd you get there, and so on. So we try to unpack kind of the main pillars or the main tenets of a role's success profile within the hiring process. But we don't have like a standard set of questions. If you do, I'd love to. I'd love.
No, I mean, it makes total sense to me that, for instance, if someone has been highly competitive in sports, that's one of the proxies you can apply for obsession, right? Or for grinding. Like, what I'm also wondering is, because we currently, I think, have this narrative on, I don't know, social media or just somewhere around, that it is apparently super hard to build startups in Europe because people are questioning if people here have this grinding spirit. What do you say to that, right? Because if I now listen to what you say, you are kind of actively selecting for this obsession. You called it people have to be wired that way. So how do you, like, number one would be, would you agree there is this narrative out there that people are questioning the spirit in Europe that you can build startups? And B, depending on what you think on that, how would you put this with the experiences you now had where you apparently are successful in building a company which incorporates that type of spirit?
I mean, I agree. I think we see it a lot. We see it too much, probably, in social media. I think the short answer for us is you kind of want to build like a Gallic village, right, within that overall sentiment. So, with more than 80 million people in Germany alone, there's likely some batch that's hopefully not too small that fits that narrative. The way we see it is it's probably harder, but in terms of employee laws, in terms of the overall sentiment, in terms of how we're culturally wired in Germany or Europe versus the States, for example, with capitalism essentially. But I think it's still possible to live and embrace European values and kind of build a Gallic village within that sentiment that's just performance driven and outcome driven and success driven. So yeah, that's why we set it up.
We would have a ton of more questions, but the time is up. How can those who are listening and are now getting super excited about the RobCo story or just your story, where do they find you and where should they follow?
Yeah, so we're online at rob.co. Nice 3-letter domain. You can find us there, all open roles, everything we're offering towards customers. And we're hiring across the stack in Europe and the US. So we'd love to hear from you. And then, of course, on LinkedIn and so on as well. And yeah, would love to interact.
Thank you very, very much. This has been a really exciting conversation. And thanks for sharing it with us.
Melanie, Christian, enjoyed it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now we would love to hear from you. How did you like it? What should we improve? Do you have any suggestions, ideas, or dream podcast guests? Please let us know.
Thank you, and see you again next week.